Every Sunday from November of 2011 to February 2020, people from the US and from Mexico gathered at Friendship Park on the Tijuana-San Diego border to worship and share Holy Communion. No matter what obstacles the US Border Patrol threw at it, this border church would adjust and keep gathering. When, for example, Border Patrol would not allow the two sides to stand close enough to hear each other's words, they would stand 50 feet apart and conduct worship over cell phones. When the participants were forbidden to pass food and drink through the fence, they would practice what they call sacramental solidarity and serve parallel Eucharists on each side of the border. When the chain-link fence that separated them eventually gave way to a formidable steel barrier, the worshipers continued to pass the peace across that barrier, pinky to pinky, through tiny holes in the wall. In 2020, even before the COVID pandemic began, our government closed down the American side of the park. But the border church remains undaunted. These days, participants on the American side migrate from one location to another as close to the border as they can safely get and worship online, while their friends on the Mexican side continue to gather in the park to worship, dine, and minister to the displaced people in their midst. This week, in anticipation of Mother's Day, both sides are organizing flower deliveries to moms who are separated from their loved ones, especially moms in detention centers here in the US and in shelters in Mexico. The vision and mission of this resilient church is, in their own words, to see God's love arriving fully along the US-Mexico borderlands so that all might experience the presence of heaven on earth in this place. I have followed this church online over the years, and this week, as I reflected on our reading from John's Gospel, its beautiful and tenacious border ministry came to mind once again. For this fourth Sunday of Easter, traditionally known as Good Shepherd Sunday, the lectionary offers us a passage that is dense in detail. We have sheep, a sheepfold, a shepherd, a gate, a gatekeeper, a pasture, and a sneaky band of thieves and bandits. It is a lot to keep track of. At one point, as you heard read, the gospel writer comes right out and says, Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they didn't understand what he was saying. Yeah, no kidding. The metaphor of the Good Shepherd is a familiar one to us, and there is, of course, plenty to say about it. But today I would like to focus on a different part of the reading, the part where Jesus says, I am the gate. I am the gate for the sheep. What does that mean? Many of us, when we think of gates, might think first of locks and security cameras and alarms. Gates that serve as barriers. Toddler gates, swimming pool gates, puppy training gates, prison gates, or gated communities. Gates that are, for any number of reasons, sinister or benign, closed most of the time. And gates can serve this function. But is this what Jesus is saying about himself? Is he saying, I am a good and necessary barrier? There are, as you well know, several Christian voices in the public square right now who would say, yes, this is exactly what Jesus is saying about himself. And this means that we are well within our rights as followers of this Jesus to erect protective barriers of our own, to delineate sharply between us and them, to keep our walls high and our openings narrow, to prioritize our own security over everything else. But, as is usually the case with biblical interpretation, I would suggest that context is key. In the section of John's Gospel that immediately precedes this passage about sheep and gates, Jesus heals a man who has been blind since birth. The healing, which happens on the Sabbath, infuriates the religious leaders of the day, and they respond with a series of interrogations which escalate in intensity and outrage. They question the healed man. They question the eyewitnesses. They question the man's parents. Finally, they question the healed man again, and when he doubles down on his testimony, insisting that Jesus is indeed a holy prophet of God, the leaders, full of rage and contempt, drive the man out of the synagogue. They cast him outside the gates and bang those gates shut. In case we're tempted to gloss over what that excommunication meant to this healed man and his family, consider that in first century Palestine, the synagogue was the social, economic, and cultural hub of the Jewish people. It was the place where business was transacted, where legal matters were decided, where community was fostered, where family life was supported and resourced. To lose access to your synagogue was to lose your sense of identity and belonging altogether. It was to lose the very ground you stood on. When Jesus hears that this man has been driven out of his religious and cultural home, he goes to him, encourages him, and welcomes him into the community of Jesus' followers. And then, without missing a beat, he turns to the crowds and says, "I am the gate." Suddenly, the metaphor resonates in quite a different way, doesn't it? This week, as I've reflected on our siblings of faith who gather in Friendship Park every week, as I've imagined their persistent hands reaching through small gaps in a cold steel barrier to exchange peace, prayer, bread, wine, I have heard Jesus' words in a way that gives me chills. I am the gate. Not I am the wall, the barrier, the dividing line. I am the gate, the opening, the passageway. I am the one who challenges every system, be it religious, political, economic, or cultural, that conspires to throw people out, to police access, threaten belonging, and thwart our common life as the children of God. I am the place where the abundance of divine life pours forth freely so that everyone can make their way to green pastures, still waters, right pathways, the house and table of God where goodness and mercy abide. In other words, Jesus' metaphor of the gate is all about liberation, all about invitation. When Jesus says, "I am the gate," he is beckoning us both in and out. On the one hand, offering us a place of sanctuary to come in and rest, to catch our breath, to return home and remember once again that we are held and loved. But on the other hand, he is gently prodding us out. Out beyond the enclosure, out into the pastures, hillsides, and valleys, out towards those good works of witness, solidarity, resistance, and resurrection he calls us to take up in this precarious world. This is the complexity of the gate. It is at once the locus of our protection and the site of our commissioning. It is good and right to come in as we are in right now. And it is essential and beautiful to go out. In his book on Christian contemplation entitled Into the Silent Land, Martin Laird describes walking across the moor one day with a friend who has 4 dogs. As they walk, 3 of those dogs run way ahead, having the time of their lives as they leap over creeks and chase after rabbits. The 4th dog, though, does not follow after his companions. Instead, he runs in one tiny, tight circle in front of his owner, over and over and over again. No matter how far ahead the other dogs go, no matter how wide and expansive the moor appears, this dog sticks to his little circle. When Laird asks for an explanation, his friend replies, "This dog was kept in a tiny cage for his entire life before I adopted him. His body has left the cage, but his mind is still trapped inside. For him, the world outside the cage does not truly exist." What is it in us, I wonder, that resists the open gate? Where in our lives are we walled off, closed to transformation and averse to movement, risk, freedom, and joy? If Jesus really is the entry point to abundant life, then can we know and trust his voice well enough to follow him out when he invites us? Can we stop running in those tight little circles we find most familiar and most comfortable and enter into the pastures that lie open before us? Can we lean into the sure knowledge that the one who is both gate and shepherd will never allow us to be devoured or destroyed? There are many historians who say that shepherds in Jesus' day actually slept across the openings of their sheepfolds at night, literally placing their bodies in the way of predators, both human and animal, who would otherwise enter and eat the sheep. Bandits, lions, bears, wolves, anyone or anything who threatened the flock would have to go through the flesh of the shepherd first. This is my body, given for you. The thieves and bandits who threaten the flock and lead them astray, who bypass the gate and enter only to divide and conquer, are legion. Theologian Derek Penwell reminds us that gatekeeping is a universal human business. Every institution has gatekeepers, people or systems that decide who belongs and who doesn't. Let's be honest, churches do this too. But in today's gospel text, Jesus rejects any form of gatekeeping that shuts out vulnerable, broken, or otherwise inconvenient people. He makes himself the standard by which every other gate must be measured. What does this mean for us? At a time when predatory power is used day after day to separate, expel, and criminalize, what does it mean for us to embody the spirit of Jesus, the gate who opens into abundant life? As asylum seekers are detained, as nations are bombed, as entire people groups are othered and abandoned, how might we reach across the barriers which feel so steely and formidable? One morsel of bread, one whisper of peace, one open hand, one pinky at a time. In this moment when religious institutions are losing credibility, when many people look at the church and see nothing but high walls and locked gates, how might we offer genuine belonging, solidarity, and welcome? John Fanasteel, one of the founding pastors of the Border Church, once said in an interview that he shows up every Sunday specifically to draw attention to the true nature of the border. Where others see a place of fear, crime, death, division, and hopelessness, he insists that those who gather for worship and communion see a place of encounter, exchange, friendship, and fellowship. In other words, they make it their practice to see Jesus in themselves, in each other, in the very spaces of deepest pain and brokenness. Jesus, the gate, unlocked, wide open, inviting, free, laying his very life down across the dividing line so that all might taste abundant life, so that all might experience the presence of heaven on earth in this place. May it be so. Amen.